Hi everyone, welcome to my podcast, The Knitting Equestrian Nomad. This is season 1 and episode 5. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm looking at my notes, looking at what I'm going to talk about and forgetting my introduction. My name is Corrina and I live in Western Washington State with my partner, our 2 kitties who may make an appearance, and my 2 horses, which are both Mustangs. I'm recording on Sunday, June 5th, 2022. Today is my nephew's birthday. Happy birthday, Frank. Frank lives in Wisconsin with my sister and her husband, his dad. So I'm sure they're celebrating there with my mom and stepdad, who also live in Wisconsin. So my partner and I have wished Frank a happy birthday already, so hopefully he's enjoying his day. It's spring and still quite rainy, which is not unusual for this part of the Pacific Northwest in June. We always say that summer begins July 5th. That is often the case. We've been spoiled the last couple years with very nice, warm, sunny springs, and this one, even though it's kind of normal rainy weather for us, it feels like we're about a month behind. But in fact, we are probably not. Yesterday was a gorgeous sunny day, and I was able to pick up hay for my horses. I mowed the lawn. My partner went for a bike ride. I gardened, and then we planted 14 raspberry canes, so in a nice row that I can see from my window here. So I'm sure those raspberry canes are very happy that it's raining today. So again, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. For new listeners, this podcast is primarily about my knitting projects and my horsemanship journey with my 2 horses, Odin and Bragi, the Mustangs. They are Mustangs that I adopted from the Bureau of Land Management, also known as the BLM Wild Horse Adoption Program. I've had Odin for 4 years now and Bragi for 2. I'll talk about them in more detail later in the episode because I want to talk about kind of the Nomad part of my handle. But first, I want to talk about knitting. So this includes old finished projects, recently finished projects, and what's on the needles now. I'm wearing a project I finished a few years ago, so I'll just bring this in a little bit closer. This is a very simple pattern made from sock yarn. It's 2 skeins of yarn. The red is a solid skein, and then this variegated color is, the contrasting color is either variegated or self-striping. It's been too long for me to remember what it was, but it's, again, a very simple repeat pattern. It's a pattern of 5. So you just cast on in multiples of 5 for however wide you want your scarf. I made this one a little bit wider. And then when you knit 5, and then I think for this part, you make a stitch. So this kind of bump. Well, let me hold it like this. So for this bump, you make one, and then for this one, although that doesn't quite seem right. So it seems like one of them you knit 2 together, and the other one you make one. It's a free pattern, so if I have it all wrong, hopefully, I know this definitely looks like a different kind of pattern, but I honestly don't remember. It was just a very simple repeat. That's what I do remember. And then you knit each color in a back and then forth, and then you start knitting the second color back and forth, and so on. So anyway, I finished this a few years ago. It's a great travel knitting, great conference conference call knitting and stuff like that. So it's very easy. You don't have to pay too much attention to it while you're knitting. What else have I done? Oh, I finished my socks. So these are the socks that I was working on, the Patent Croy yarn, and I've worn them, so there's probably like a little fuzzy or probably piece of hay on them. So these are, again, Patents Croy yarn, free pattern by Yarnspiration. So it's got this kind of ribbed section here, kind of raised bumps where you use kind of a slip stitch to feature that. So here are the socks. They're quite warm, a little bit too warm for this time of year, but they'll be nice for about 9 months out of the year. So can start wearing them in September through about end of April. Maybe that's only 8 months. What would I do differently? I will probably knit this pattern again because I have a lot of Patents Croy yarn. I would probably knit the cuff and heel. This is a gusset, heel flap with gusset, and toes, maybe in contrasting colors just to make it a little more interesting. But you know, having a just plain gray pair of socks is kind of handy for the work wardrobe for sure. On my needles, still working on this raglan kind of knit your own adventure by Knitting Fool, knittingfool.com. I only have 3 more rows before I finish the yoke, and then can divide for sleeves. So that's what this looks like. So this is out of Wool Ease by Lion brand. This is DK Cake, and it's a self-striping yarn. So I may make this 3/4 sleeves just to make sure I have enough yarn for the length. Having a long enough sweater is more important to me than having full length sleeves. And I cast on a project this morning. So actually I cast it on yesterday and then I recast it on. So this is a paid for pattern, I think. Erica Huser Designs, and these are the Songbird Mittens. So the reason why, so I'm making it out of this gold color and this pink color. The sun's starting to come shining through the clouds, so it might get a little bright here. But anyway, these are the 2 colors that I picked. Originally, I was going to knit this so that the gold color was the main color and then the pink color was the contrasting color. However, when I started the chart, I kept getting them mixed up. So I decided to make it easy on myself, rip it out, so now the pink color is the main color, and hopefully that'll make the chart easier for me to read. So I'm just barely cast on. I have one of the kitties here. It could be the kitty that likes to murder yarn, so I have to be careful. I have to always make sure that I secure my knitting projects. So here is what I've cast on so far. The other thing I'm doing is I'm trying to teach myself brioche. So I have been kind of trying to teach myself this for a while. I tried a course, an online course on Skillshare. It's kind of like Craftsy or kind of like Masterclass or one of those other paid for subscriptions. I happen to subscribe to Skillshare. And I wasn't quite getting it. I tried some other YouTube videos, but one of the things that these YouTube videos often do is that they show you English style and then they show you continental style. One way is knitting with you're holding your yarn in the right hand, continental styles holding the yarn in your left hand. And when they switch back and forth, I just found that too confusing. So I checked out a book from the library called Brioche Knitting for Beginners and Beyond. This is by Leslie Ann Robinson, and it's pretty good. However, what I found was that some of the terminology in brioche, I think experienced knitters understand yarn overs and slip one and slip stitch and stuff like that, and that's what brioche is. It's a combination of a yarn over and a slip and knit or purl. What I found was the way that it's written is not quite in the right order that you actually do things, and I didn't find this out until I watched a YouTube video by, checking my notes here, B Hooked, capital B, capital Hooked, and I'll put a link in my description box here. She is sponsored by Red Heart Yarn, and she has a video called Brioche Knitting for Beginners, single color brioche stitch, and I found it really helpful. Well, happy too. But what I found is that what people are calling a yarn over is actually bringing the yarn to the front. The yarn over, and as if to purl, and you purl slipwise. No, you slip purl-wise, but you need the yarn in front to do that. When you are yarning over, your yarn is in front after you slipped, and then you just, instead of, getting it around the stitch on the other side of the needle, you are just bringing it over the needle, and then you knit. And that creates that kind of brioche stitch that has that yarn over and the slipped purl, if that makes sense. But the point is that when the video says yarn over, they're actually bringing the yarn to the front. And then when they're knitting, that's when the yarn over is happening. I hope that makes sense. It appears to be a little bit easier for continental knitters because it seems like it's just a matter of kind of capturing that yarn to purl when you're doing the slip, like you would catch a float in stranded color work. I can do stranded color work, hold yarn in my left hand and my right hand to keep the two separate, but I find just regular knitting, I just prefer to have it in my right hand. So anyway, I can highly recommend that book. And then I'm going to knit a hat, a 2-color brioche pattern from that book that I showed you, the Brioche Knitting for Beginners. So the pattern calls for, I'll shut the door. Sorry about that. I had some noise downstairs. The pattern calls for an Aran weight yarn, and I have DK weight, and I don't want to hold it double, so I knit a gauge swatch and figured out what my how many stitches I need. So that's how I'm gonna do this. So I don't necessarily recommend doing that for if you're a beginning knitter to try to take on all of that, but I mean there are some concepts that I do understand, even though the technique of brioche is new to me. Okay, that's all that I have going on in my knitting life. Actually, that's not true. I'm still working on the Arnie and Carlos Spring Along, the stranded knitting patchwork blocks. However, I worked this week on finishing my sock, so I didn't work on that at all. But that is still on my needles. Still, the Ghost Horse Sweater by Caitlin Hunter, also known as Boyland Knits, is still on my needles, but I haven't worked on that for quite a while. So I think I'm just going to let that rest for a while and probably not talk about it again. Okay, recent life events. We returned from vacation and have been back to work for a week. I really miss being on vacation, and who doesn't? I hope to include a little more video from our vacation at the end of this episode, and I'll see if I can make that happen. Again, I'm a new podcaster, and some of the editing techniques is a little foreign to me, and I'm not particularly tech savvy. So hopefully I can make it happen. If I don't, my apologies. I have sourdough bread going on in the kitchen. I've used this same recipe for several years. It's a very easy mix together bread flour and whole wheat flour proportionally by weight, some salt, some water, and sourdough starter. And then it's a fully hydrated recipe. And then basically you just kind of fold it together about every 30 minutes for several hours. And then after the final 30-minute rest period, it can go in the oven. And I bake mine in a Dutch oven, a cast iron Dutch oven with a lid. It's in a very hot oven. It starts out at 500 degrees. So the bread is wonderful. It makes 2 loaves. Usually what I do is I bake 1 loaf and I put the other unbaked loaf in the freezer so that I have it for next time. And it works really well. I just thaw it out for a couple hours and then stick it all in the preheated oven. This week I have focused my cooking efforts on things that need to be eaten before they go bad. I hate to see waste, so I made a chocolate pound cake out of homemade butter that was nearing the end of its life as butter. So that's a wonderful way to use butter. I made a pear sauce out of an overripe pear, and that goes well with that pound cake. I made soup from radish greens. Ordinarily, I put radish greens and stuff like that in the compost pile, which I don't really consider waste, but I have this cookbook called, what's it called? Oh, the Victory Garden Cookbook. And it really, it has recipes for a lot of things that you wouldn't ordinarily think of making something out of. And I also plan to make pesto from carrot top leaves, so I'll let you know how that goes. I think you can make pesto out of radish greens too if you want to. I have made pesto out of nasturtium leaves and flowers. It's very tasty, so I'll report on that later. Gardening. My little porch tomato, it's an orange hat plant. It's doing pretty well. It seems to be thriving. And I transplanted a couple other tomatoes that I bought from tomato plants that I bought from the farm store or the feed store to be its neighbor on the deck. So hopefully they will all get along great, and we'll get tomatoes in a couple months, ideally. Everything else seems to be growing. I haven't harvested anything yet, but I expect to be able to harvest some greens this week and maybe some radishes, strawberries. There's lots of berries, white berries in the strawberry bed. The asparagus crowns that I planted a few weeks ago, I've seen a few shoots come up from that. Of course, we can't harvest that. You need to let those go through a couple cycles before you actually harvest it, just so the roots have are able to build up the stores that they need from the sun. So I'm just very happy to see those shoots come up. And then rhubarb. Hopefully, I should be able to harvest some rhubarb this week too. So I'll probably make some rhubarb sauce. Okay, I wanted to talk about the Nomad part of my handle. And I guess one of the reasons why I want to talk about this, because ordinarily I talk about some horsemanship stuff. I haven't been doing horsemanship very much lately. Part of it is the weather. It's just I don't have an indoor place to work with my horses. And outside, you just have to be careful when it's slippery, because, if you're teaching a horse something new, you want them to succeed, give them the tools for success. And this can include having adequate footing that makes them feel stable and comfortable when I'm asking them to do something. You don't want them to slip and fall, and then it makes the exercise a bad experience. So setting them up for success is really important. So that's one reason why I haven't done much is just because it's been raining, and when it's not raining, I'm working. So the Nomad part of my handle, I guess, comes from the fact that I've never been particularly attached to any discipline. I have loved horses since I was a little girl, and wanted one terribly when I was a kid. I would say the basis of my friendships when I was a kid was whether or not that person had a horse. They were that we could ride. That seems very shallow, but in hindsight, it was something that we had in common, something that my friends wanted to share, and it really has ended up being great friendships over the years. One of my main friends was I guess you could call her a neighbor. She lived a mile, maybe a mile and a half away. She had 2 horses, couldn't ride 2 horses at a time, so she and I rode together. She didn't have very many friends in school, and I was her friend, and we were really friends. So I just want to make that clear. It just wasn't all about the horses. It was definitely about our friendship as well. And we rode those 2 horses all over the place during the summer. We rode bareback, we rode with halters and lead ropes, and we would just get on and ride all day and then eventually show up for dinner. So it was a wonderful way to grow up. And it was just an tremendous sense of freedom, and because there was no way that we could go these places on foot when we were 8 years old, or even when we were 15, not driving. And when we used to ride in the woods all the time, so we certainly weren't riding our bicycles there. I didn't get my own horse until, and I should say, that friendship ended like many friendships do after high school. People graduate and they go on their ways. She ended up getting married and having a family, and I ended up doing a bunch of different things that didn't involve getting married and having a family. And someday I'll talk about that. It's not a secret or anything, but just not relevant for right now. One of the things I did do is I started working for a stable, and I started cleaning stalls in exchange for riding lessons. That was just, it was kind of I guess you could say that was my introduction to horsemanship, because as a child, I didn't really understand communication with horses. Horses are funny. Horses in some ways are a lot like cats. They'll come to you if they feel like it, or if maybe you have something to offer that they want. I'm not saying that's correct horsemanship. That was just kind of my rudimentary understanding of it at the time. And sometimes, I wanted to ride, well, my friend and I wanted to ride, and the horses didn't want to have anything to do with us. So we spent all of our, much of our afternoon, chasing them around, hoping and praying they would come to us. Sometimes we would use grain as bribery to get them to come to us, and do the kind of sneaky thing where you would hide the halter behind your back and shake a bucket of grain at them. That's not how I catch my horses now at all. I'm very upfront with them. Riding lessons was interesting. I learned how to put on a saddle for the first time, and I think I was 20 at the time. I learned about the different gaits. I guess I understood walk and trot, which was very bouncy when you're riding bareback. And I understood gallop, which, was basically hang on for dear life and ride. I learned about, and I started out riding Western. I learned about, maybe the posting trot, even in a Western saddle. It's a comfortable way to ride if your horse is moving out, not doing a gentle jog where you want to sit. I learned about cantering, which is a 3-beat gait. It's not quite a gallop. A gallop is a much faster canter, I suppose, or lope if you're Western. And I started doing Western pleasure, which is basically walk, trot, canter in a circle and reverse and doing it in the other direction with a whole group of people. And it's basically about, how comfortable and easy your horse is to ride in those. And I did well. However, I kind of found it, I guess I got kind of tired of it. People do their whole lives doing Western pleasure, and that's fine. I'm a nomad. I like to explore different things. There was a trainer at the time at the barn that I was at who trained hunter jumper horses. So horses that jumped over fences, low fences, high fences, whatever fences there were, and other obstacles. And that looked like fun. It looked like her horses were having fun too. So I tried that. There was also at this barn, there was an active kind of cattle program. So people could learn how to rope steers or do cow penning or cow cutting, all these kind of things that you might see in rodeos or just, I forgot what they're called. I want to call it a play day. I'm not sure if that's the accurate term. But all these kind of useful ranch skills, I suppose, that maybe those of us, at least where I live, you don't really need those because we don't have these ginormous ranches where you need to ride out all day and bring your cows, separate your cows and for different jobs or different, separate cows going to market, separate, boy cows from girl cows, whatever needs to be done. But it was really fun. I really enjoyed that, and I actually got a second horse at that time when I started that. And the Western pleasure horse I had was a cute little paint mare, and she was a great little Western pleasure horse. She was my first horse, very sweet horse. And then I got a paint gelding that was an experienced cow horse, and his name was Prince Pike. He was in Appaloosa. And I learned a lot from him. I learned how to rope steers. I learned how to cut cattle. I learned how to team pen. Really fun. And I think I'm probably going to end that part of my story there. Suffice to say, my time with those horses ended. I ended up selling them. Prince went to a lesson program. He was a really great beginner horse teacher. He was huge, but he would lower his head for the tiniest kid and open his mouth to allow that kid to put on a bridle. So my point is, sort of that willingness. My horsemanship changed from when I was a kid, not really understanding how to really communicate with a horse, to seeing Prince lower his head to accept a bit from a little kid. This willing partnership, this cooperation. That was a real eye-opener for me, and I guess in part I didn't feel like I had that to the extent that I wanted it, and also I just really needed to do different things with my life at that time. I was a young adult. I needed to prepare for college, even though I was, in my early 20s at the time, and just prepare for life. And so these horses went to good homes, and and hopefully they got to spend the rest of their lives in those good homes. That is my ultimate wish. So this episode is getting long, so I'm going to end that there, and I'll talk about kind of my re-entry into horses again. Not while I was in college, but shortly thereafter. So this discussion about being a nomad will continue later. But I do want to talk about just kind of the indie bits, as I hear other podcasters say, just about the inspiration for horsemanship, knitting, and gardening. I didn't have any horsemanship inspiration really this week, except for Karen Rolfe of Dressage Naturally. I really enjoy her podcast. She's a high-level dressage writer with a very refreshing philosophy about horses having happy and athletic horses, and I think that's a great goal, and it's one that I strive for. I just kind of need to figure out what my goals are with my horses, and I think partnership is a huge part of it right now. A lot of my horse time that I have while I'm working full time and doing other things really has to do with just their daily care, whether it's having to go pick up a half ton of hay and load it and unload it, and making sure feeding and their pens are clean, and I actually pick their pastures too. So that's a lot of my horsemanship time, spending time with them, just kind of around. But they're good boys. They're very good boys, because the time that I do spend with them, I always try to make sure that we are learning something and communicating with each other, so we get that sense of cooperation. Another inspiration for knitting for me is Knit All the Yarn podcast. A young woman, or young middle-aged woman, I don't know, named Lisa from Michigan, has a podcast called Knit All the Yarn. She, I think she is the reason why I started podcasting. She calls her own words are her awkward little podcast. She talks about her knitting project. She talks about her family a little bit, and she talks about some life things, and also what she's reading and watching. So her podcast is very basic, like mine is. It's recorded and then posted, and you can see a lot of podcasts on YouTube that are highly produced, which is wonderful for the viewer. But I have to say, what I enjoy most about Lisa's podcast is that she's very relatable, and she made me feel like that I could do this too. So kudos to her. A link to her podcast is in the description box. I also like the Grow Veg podcast. That's my gardening inspiration. I have a link to that. And also Dan and Kay Jones of the Bakery Bears, also in Great Britain. I have a link to their YouTube channel. Theirs is a very well produced podcast. So, and I enjoy watching it very much. I also watched the latest episode of Fruity Knitting podcast, also a very wonderfully produced podcast. Okay, that is all I have where I can be found. I should have this memorized, but I have to look at my notes. So on Facebook, I am the Equestrian Nomad. On Instagram, I am CMEQ Nomad, all one phrase. My blog is equestriannomad.net, and I often post my show notes there. And then my email is theequestriannomad@gmail.com. So I hope to add maybe a short video from our vacation in Oregon last week, and that should be it. Thanks for tuning in. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up. Feel free to comment, and see you next time, I hope. Bye.
Clarno Unit, John Day National Monument, fossil beds.